Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a dramatic and unfolding story. Belarusian revolt, army defection triggers nationwide uprising. Is Lukashenko losing control? Over the next several minutes, I'll walk you through how the latest developments have escalated this crisis, what the defection of military personnel signifies, who the key players are, how the regime is responding, and what might come next. Let's get into it. We begin with the basics. Belarus, ruled for decades by President Alexander Lukashenko, has long been accused of authoritarianism, human rights abuses, suppression of dissent, and tightly controlled elections. Over the years, protests have erupted repeatedly, especially after contested elections, but the regime has always managed to retain control, relying heavily on security services, police, and loyalty from the military. However, things appear to be shifting. Recently, reports have emerged that portions of the Belarusian armed forces are defecting. In some cases, military units or individual soldiers have chosen not to obey orders, have joined protest movements, or have defected across the border to neighboring countries. These defections, though still limited in scale, carry huge symbolic weight. When the military, which typically is the backbone of any authoritarian regime, begins to fracture, it suggests cracks in the foundation. Across Belarus, a wave of protests has erupted, especially in major cities like Minsk, Brest, Gomel, and Vitebsk. Citizens are taking to the streets demanding free elections, the release of political prisoners, and an end to Lukashenko's grip on power. What's striking now is the increasingly bold tone. Protesters are no longer just asking for reforms. Many are demanding regime change, or at least the removal of Lukashenko. In parallel, opposition groups are becoming bolder, more coordinated, and more willing to link up with dissenting security personnel. Lukashenko, often dubbed Europe's last dictator, is under enormous pressure. His inner circle has long depended on loyalty, patronage, and force. But when soldiers begin refusing orders, defecting, or signaling neutrality, that control is eroded. What we now see is a contest for legitimacy. Whether the regime can still claim it speaks for the state, or whether new centers of power are emerging. Let's examine a few of the most dramatic defection stories. In one border town, a military checkpoint commander reportedly allowed civilian protesters through rather than ordering them back. In another case, a platoon's weapons were turned in to local authorities, with soldiers citing conscience and refusing to suppress civilians. These incidents might at first glance seem small, but in an authoritarian state, even small acts of disobedience can have an outsized psychological effect. Why are soldiers defecting? The motivations are complex. Some are genuinely sympathetic to protesters. They may be appalled by the violence used against civilians and unwilling to carry out brutal orders. Others might sense which way the wind is blowing and try to reposition themselves in a changing balance of power. And still others may be coerced or enticed by opposition groups promising amnesty, protection, or roles in a new structure. Whatever the case, once the first cracks appear, momentum can build quickly. Opposition leaders, many of them in exile or under tight surveillance, have seized on these defections. They publicize them widely, framing them as a sign that Lukashenko's reign is weakening. They call on civilians to join protests, to protect defectors, to establish citizen checkpoints, and in some cases, to arm themselves, or at least form militias that can resist regime forces. Lukashenko's response has been severe but also revealing. He has blamed foreign interference, labeled his detractors as traitors or terrorists, and ordered a crackdown. Security forces, police, riot units, KGB operatives, and loyal special forces have launched mass arrests, used tear gas, stun grenades, and live ammunition in some instances. Internet blackouts and media censorship are being deployed more frequently, presumably to hamper coordination among protesters and to prevent narratives unfavorable to the regime from spreading. A telling sign. Troops have been moved into restive cities, and armored vehicles have been deployed to key intersections. Helicopter and drone surveillance is in use. Yet, in several zones, protesters have pushed back, forming barricades, erecting roadblocks, and sometimes engaging directly with security forces. These confrontations are escalating in intensity. But even as he uses force, Lukashenko's statements betray unease. He has publicly warned of traitors within the military, threatened harsh retribution, and pledged retaliation against defectors. But he's also holding back somewhat, perhaps fearing further fragmentation if he overreaches. Let's turn to international reactions. Neighboring states and global powers are watching closely. The European Union, the United States, and some NATO countries have condemned Belarusian crackdowns, threatened sanctions on the regime, and extended diplomatic support to the protest movement. Russia, a longtime ally of Belarus, finds itself in a delicate position. It has historically backed Lukashenko, but it also fears instability spilling over its borders, or the appearance of enabling an unpopular regime in a dire state. Thus far, Moscow has offered rhetorical support, warning external actors not to interfere, but has been cautious about overt intervention. Russia may now face pressure to choose sides decisively. One critical dimension is whether defections converge into a coherent alternative power structure, some kind of parallel military or governance body. If defecting officers and units can organize, coordinate, and link up across regions, they may form a core of a post-Lukashenko force. Similarly, if opposition leaders can integrate disaffected security elements into their planning, they may engineer a transition, peaceful or otherwise. On the ground, everyday citizens have a huge stake. Many are risking arrest, injury, or worse by joining protests, supporting defectors, or maintaining strikes. Some public sector workers, teachers, hospital staff, utility workers, are engaging in work stoppages to support resistance. The economy is cratering under the weight of sanctions, capital outflows, and the logistical disruption of civil unrest. The state's ability to pay security forces may be compromised. Inflation, shortages, and fear are mounting. We're also seeing emergent local structures. In neighborhoods, community committees are forming to coordinate demonstrations, share information, provide legal aid, and support protesters. In some areas, citizens are creating underground networks for food distribution or protecting protest sites. These grassroots foundations are vital because the regime's control over mass media and formal institutions means that alternative infrastructure must be built outside official channels. What are the risks? Even if defections increase, Lukashenko might dig in through brute force and external backing. He still controls many security elements. A violent crackdown, combined with targeted suppression of leadership, could quash the movement before it becomes irreversible. There's also the possibility of civil war, localized armed clashes, militia violence, or guerrilla tactics if moderate protest fails. Humanitarian disaster, refugee flows, and spillover effects into neighboring states are serious dangers. Another risk is fragmentation within the opposition. If defectors and civilian protesters can't unite on strategy, vision, and chain of command, the regime could exploit divisions. Competing leaders, ideological splits, or regional disagreements may weaken efforts. Also, foreign intervention is a double-edged sword. Too much outside influence might politicize the movement or give Lukashenko a propaganda tool to brand the uprising as foreign-engineered. What's the tipping point? Historically, regime collapse often follows a critical mass of security defections, rising ungovernability, economic collapse, and loss of legitimacy. When the government loses its monopoly on violence, or when key pillars of support abandon it, the transition becomes possible. In Belarus today, we're seeing some of those conditions: defecting military loyalty, emboldened protests, weakening economy, and eroding public confidence in the regime. Still, we should be cautious. A few defections don't guarantee the fall of a regime. They're necessary but not sufficient. The regime may retaliate with loyalty incentives for remaining forces, purge suspected disloyal elements, and restrict free movement and communications. If Lukashenko can reassert control over information, clamp down on key cities, and isolate protest hubs, the uprising could be contained. What to watch in the coming days and weeks? First, more defections. Are isolated incidents scaling into a widespread cascade across divisions and regions? Second, coordination. Are defecting units communicating and acting in unison, offering a de facto alternative command structure? Third, opposition alignment. Are protest leaders integrating defectors into their plans, and do they articulate a clear vision for post-Lukashenko transition? Fourth, regime responses. Is Lukashenko going too hard, triggering backlash, or too soft, losing control? Fifth, external influence. Does Russia intervene more visibly? Do Western powers escalate support, sanctions, or even humanitarian aid? It's important to note human consequences. In the turmoil, civilians remain vulnerable. Protesters risk violence, torture, or disappearance. Defectors may be pursued, arrested, or targeted. Families suffer, and the social fabric frays. Everyone involved is operating under huge pressures, fear, and uncertainty. So what's my assessment? Right now, I believe Lukashenko is under unprecedented threat. The defection episodes may still be limited, but they mark a turning of the tide. The regime's legitimacy is cracking, and the psychology of resistance is shifting. If protesters, opposition groups, and defectors can continue to escalate in a coordinated, resilient fashion while avoiding debilitating internal fractures, Lukashenko's stay in power is increasingly unstable. The balance may tip in favor of the uprising, though we are not there yet. The regime still holds significant levers of control, and a brutal crackdown could still reverse momentum. If the opposition can catalyze mass mobilization, protect defectors, maintain unity, and perhaps secure political or diplomatic backing, a negotiated transition or forced collapse is possible. At the very least, we should expect months of political turbulence, possible skirmishes, regional instability, and intense international scrutiny. In conclusion, what began as protest is now evolving into a direct challenge to state authority. Military defections, though perhaps not yet decisive, are a powerful signal. Lukashenko is no longer operating from a position of total strength. The regime is under existential pressure. Whether the revolt ultimately succeeds will depend on whether disparate forces can coalesce, whether the regime resists without collapse, and whether violent escalation can be avoided or contained. I'll continue to monitor developments closely and bring you updates as they unfold. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis useful, do like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What do you think will happen next in Belarus?